All right, welcome everybody to another ShareWise webinar. Today I'm joined by the CEO of Vault Resources, Prashant. Look, the structure of this webinar, we'll just go through a quick presentation. I've got a few questions ready for Prashant, and then if you want to ask any questions, just put them in the chat, and I'll get to that after the conclusion of the presentation. And we'll have probably 5-10 minutes worth of questions to be answered there. And then we'll part ways. But Prashant, thank you for joining. If you could just introduce yourself and a brief introduction of VRC for those who may not know.
All right. Thank you. Thank you for the introduction, Luke, and good morning, everyone. My name is Prashant Chintawar. I'm speaking to you from New York, only about 17,000 kilometers away. Before I get into the presentation, I really want to take a moment and express my very sincere condolences for all Australians about the incident that happened over the weekend. That's really unfortunate. You would expect that in civilized society, these kind of things do not happen, but unfortunately they did. As Luke said, my name is Prashant Chintawar. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of Vault Resources, a company that is listed on Australian Stock Exchange. My background is primarily in the advanced materials, specialty chemical industry. I have done everything from managing EBITDA and cash management for large $1.1 billion business to creating new businesses at very large companies such as BASF and Honeywell. So I'd like to spend maybe 15-20 minutes telling you who we are and probably more importantly, where we are and where we're going. And definitely look forward to having a healthy dialogue and discussion here. So if that's okay, Luke, I'll start sharing my slides. I will not go through each and every slide on the deck if that's okay.
The floor is yours, Prashant.
Thank you. Okay, can everyone see the slides?
Yeah, that looks good.
Perfect, thank you. So the last time I checked, there are about 118 elements in the periodic table. For today's presentation, we'll only focus on one, which is carbon or graphite. Although I must admit that we do have some presence, some projects, both in gold and lithium. So as a public company, I'm going to start off with this disclaimer and then move on to who we are. As I said, we're listed on the ASX. We've been on that exchange for quite some time now. And I do want to actually really thank our major shareholders here. Asimve Kabunga, Dominic, Peter Notman, and BNP Paribas. So they've been really staunch and very consistent supporters of Vault even before I joined this company 3 years ago, as I said. So sincere thanks from my bottom of my heart to these shareholders. Our global HQ is in Perth, Australia, like a lot of mining companies. But going forward, as you will hear from our story, we're establishing a very strong footprint in the US, and I will explain the rationale behind that. We also have operations in Ukraine and Tanzania, and some projects, some tenements, potential projects in Serbia and Guinea. So what we bring to the table is a couple of things. One is we have a working graphite refinery in Ukraine, and that's been there since 2017. That's very unique. There are quite a few graphite companies, but to the best of our knowledge, as far as having a working graphite refinery, we're very unique. And we've been serving customers both in Asia and Europe since 2017 with our high purity graphite, 99.5%, roughly 99.95% pure material. On top of that, we have really patent pending and low cost technology for production of ultra high purity, which is 99.95 material. We're one of the few non-Chinese, ex-Chinese graphite producers. And we will spend a few minutes talking about this deal that we announced last week regarding our Bunyu project, the Tanzania graphite mine. So let's start at the beginning. Graphite goes into everything, quite a few applications, but one of the largest application and still a growing application for graphite is actually batteries. And when I say batteries, it's not really only the lithium-ion battery which goes into your electric vehicles and energy storage applications. Remember, graphite has been used in the very conventional lead-acid batteries and also alkaline batteries, those AAA, AA batteries that you can get at the shop, which are typically rechargeable or non-rechargeable batteries. So when you look at the projections from this benchmark minerals regarding how much graphite we need and what's the demand versus supply gap, it's very crystal clear that over the next few years, in fact 5 years, which is right around the corner, you will need 30 plus natural graphite mines and roughly a dozen of synthetic graphite plants. So that kind of puts things in perspective in terms of the impending demand versus supply gap. Then let's move on to conventional applications of graphite, which are shown over here. So as I said, graphite goes into applications, lots of industrial applications, including brake linings on your car, lubricants, powdered metals, refractory applications, oil and gas, steel making, batteries, everything. So specifically, if you look into the United States, we are heavily dependent on imported graphite, primarily and maybe exclusively because the graphite production in US today is essentially zero. Although there was a US production back in 1950s and 60s in the state of Alabama, there is no natural graphite production today, and it may actually resume in the next few years. So obviously, we're importing all of that graphite. Almost 90% of that is essentially high purity flake graphite, and should not come as any surprise that almost half of this graphite is coming from China and then additional sources. So China really, if you look into where we are importing, US is importing, it's again, China is the major exporter. And the same thing can be said about the European market, where China dominates the export of purified graphite into the European market. So I'd like to spend a minute or two about what our strategy is, what our focus is, okay? So all the way to the right of the slide, you have this lithium-ion battery applications, primarily the electric vehicle, and the secondly is the energy storage, stationary energy storage, or ESS. And the product that goes into this market is typically called as a coated spherical purified graphite, or also known as battery anode material. So this market by itself, there's nothing wrong with this market. It's a growing market, even though the electric vehicle demand seems to be cooling down in US and Europe. It's still growing at double digit. And the energy storage market is growing at 30+% CAGR. So there's nothing wrong in terms of the market itself. The challenge is when you try to peel the onion and say, okay, how am I going to get into this market? You start running into these major challenges, major wall. Look at the last two steps over here, these blue boxes. In order to enter this market as a battery anode material supplier, you need to really have mastered the art of spheronization, which is very energy intensive process, typically has 55-60% yield, production yield, and carbon coating, which is a lot of science and art behind it. So what happens is if you decide to focus exclusively on the CSPG, you're looking at a very high production, very high capital intensive market. I mean, these are the $200 million. In fact, it's closer to 240, 230 million is based on the published information out there. It takes a long time to get qualified as a battery anode supplier in the lithium-ion application and has a high entry barriers. So if you look into the lithium-ion alone, it's like solving a jigsaw puzzle. So you need to have the right piece with the right color, right height, and it has to perfectly fit into the battery application. So what we have decided is we said, okay, let's go a step ahead, step back, and then let's look at the middle two boxes, refining. So if you look into the high purity graphite and ultra high purity graphite, this is our sweet spot for a couple reasons. If you look into high HPG, that's something we have been doing since 2017, as I said, and we have a working graphite refinery in Ukraine. On top of that, UHPG, we have a patent pending process. And unfortunately, as I said, in spheronization and carbon coating, we don't really have anything unique today. Maybe down the road we will, but not today. So this is where we want to focus, refining for HPG and eventually UHPG. So our stage one, our phase one Alabama refinery will be primarily for the HPG production, and then phase two will be ultra-high purity graphite applications. And as I said, and as you saw from the previous slide, these two applications, these two varieties of graphite go into host of industrial applications, everything from your brakes, linings, refractories, and whatnot. And then all the way to the beginning of the value chain, beginning of the supply chain, you start off with either for natural graphite, it's typically mining and beneficiation, something that we have been doing for a very long time, since 1934. But in addition to that, we also want to be open and honest. And a lot of our customers are demanding that we cannot be just using our own graphite coming from the mines for obvious reasons. The Ukraine mine is in a war-torn zone, and the Bunyu project is not operational yet. So we're adding this flexibility that if necessary, when possible, we will also source graphite from other mines, operating mines in Africa. There are as you know, there are quite a few, at least 2 or 3 large operating mines in Africa. There's also operating mine in South America, and we will continue to procure them as necessary and when necessary. And when it comes to other varieties of graphite, such as synthetic, obviously we'll be relying on additional other sources. So all in all, in summarize, we're primarily focused, at least in the near term, on the refining aspect of the value chain. We believe we have a strong defensible value proposition over here, which will enable us to further expand the market than what we're already doing in the Ukraine, and then essentially start generating revenues, significant revenues, and become profitable. Eventually, down the road, we may get into spherization and carbon coating, and depending on how the market evolves, we are definitely open to that concept. Moving on. So this is how I see Volt evolving over the next few years. Starting at the bottom, as I said, our primary focus for the US market will be on the refining. So there is no near-term plan in terms of getting into mining or the beneficiation. Our primary focus, the DFS that we just kicked off last week with Wave International, is for Refinery 1. That's for the high-purity graphite 99.5% material. Eventually, that refinery will also have capabilities to produce ultra-high-purity graphite down the road. Moving on to Tanzania, and I'll talk about that in a minute, but we just announced this deal for a binding term sheet to get this project off the ground, something that we have been trying to accomplish for quite some time. But there is no near-term plan to get into refining business in Tanzania for several reasons. And then moving on to Ukraine, as I said, we have been doing mining and beneficiation at Zavalievsky Graphite, which is our 70% owned subsidiary since 1934. That's a proven asset. There's absolutely no doubt about that. And since 2017, we've been also doing refining there. So that gives us some credibility in terms of how to make this product at industrial scale, at cost, quality, consistency, and reproducibility, which is what's actually expected from any customer on the industrial side. So remember, it's not only having access to the technology, it's the ability to successfully industrialize this process, which again boils down to cost, quality, consistency, reproducibility. So that's what we have proven ourselves in Ukraine, and that's what we want to prove going forward into the US market. So this is the DFS that we started, that we kicked off just about a week ago. We expect to finish this DFS sometime, I would say April, May timeframe, but definitely sometime in the June 2026 quarter. At June of this year, 2025, we actually also published the scoping study, which essentially showed a fairly strong project economics, and we're working with Wave. As I indicated, we want to take this as a stage-wise approach, a phased approach here. So it's a 2-stage process. First is using the proven design that we already have in Ukraine for the high-purity graphite. And then second step, bring the proprietary ultra-high-purity graphite technology. As I said, we want to have feed flexible design, which means we will use our own graphite. from either the Zavalievsky or from the Tanzania project, and equally importantly, from third-party sources and recycle. And we can talk about that, but there's a significant push in the US on critical minerals, and more specifically on the critical minerals refining, because the current administration has definitely realized that that's a weak point in the national policy, national strategy. And when you're dependent on a country which is not exactly friendly to the Western world, we do need to have these domestic refineries. So everything that we're planning to do in US, especially in state of Alabama, is consistent with the US federal government strategy. Some indication about what we have done on the UHPG. We published these results I think about 6 or 8 weeks ago. So the importance of this is the reactor that we're using there, which produces roughly 23 kilograms of material per batch. So it's still on a fairly small scale. It's not at a full-blown industrial scale, but it does confirm that the technology is ready to get into the Alabama Refinery Phase 2 eventually. It de-risks our production quality, and most importantly, we are now ready to get into the pilot plant stage from where we are today. So 99.5 high purity graphite is already at the industrial scale. We already have customers, in fact, repeat customers. And the plan is to have the second refinery for the US market in the state of Alabama in the near future. And then ultra-high purity graphite is, I would consider it to be advanced R&D stage. And then the next step would be the industrialization of this technology. What have we done over the past few months in terms of enhancing our US operation? We moved our headquarters. So this is still our virtual office for the Volt Energy Materials LLC is going to be at the University of Alabama. So that's a strong indication to the state government and all our partners in the state of Alabama that we are very serious about establishing footprint there. We also hired 2 industry veterans, 2 advisors, and they both come from actually Superior Graphite, which is a very admirable company, an entrepreneurial company with more than a century of experience in everything that we want to do, which is purification, sizing, blending, and maybe coating down the road. We also became members of quite a few government, semi-government, quasi-government organizations, again, to further echo the point that we are serious about the US market. Tanzania project, some of you, I'm sure most of you are aware of this thing. This is one of the world's largest graphite deposit, almost 400 million tons of MRE at 5% TGC, which gives you almost 20 million tons of contained graphite. So the next slide on this one is probably something that our investors have been waiting for a long time. So a couple of things over here before I get into the meat of this particular slide. So this fund, UF, Unbounded Opportunities Fund, is a fairly large fund. It has about 675, almost 680, almost $700 million asset under management when we last looked into that about 6 or 8 weeks ago. Secondly, this is not really one and done kind of a deal where UF says, okay, here's the check for $11 million for the Bunyu project and we walk away. No, this is actually really, we sincerely believe this is the beginning of a long-term relationship because UF has also expressed strong interest in the downstream business, the Alabama US project. So this is a good thing. And thirdly, it takes a long time. I remember my first call with UF was almost back in December 2024. So it does take a while to bring this opportunity to close such deals. But I believe this is in the best interest of all the Volt shareholders. So broadly speaking, it's an equity injection of roughly $11 million into Volt Graphite Tanzania, which means the balance of the project cost will have to be borne by Volt. So we still have work to do in terms of securing the debt portion of this project, and equally importantly, securing the bankable offtake and also the other aspects. One of the most important things that we are accomplishing via this arrangement, via this structure is, remember, there's a significant cost reduction over here. So if you were to look at the numbers here, capital cost of 37 million for 40,000 tons per annum project, and compare that with what we published back in August of 2023, which was US $33 million for about 25,000 TPA project, you're looking at more than 32% reduction in the capital cost intensity. Same thing can be said about the OPEX. Remember, back in August of 23, we projected the OPEX of roughly $670 per ton, whereas now now UF is committed to delivering $450 per ton of the OPEX. So this is the crux of this agreement in our assessment, the significant cost reduction, which we believe is really paramount or absolutely necessary to get this project off the ground, no pun intended, simply because we're living in a fairly low graphite pricing environment. Moving on to Ukraine. So despite the ongoing war, our team has been very persistent, very resilient, and we actually had a production campaign back in August, September of this year. We'll not go through each and every number, but remember, Ukraine is a proven asset, and back in 1980s, we were actually producing 60,000 tons per annum. Then obviously with the onset of war, that number has come down dramatically. But even if you look at the pre-war data, you have a sizable number there, 7,300 TPA. We also had a campaign, as I said, and then we had a favorable ruling from the Supreme Court of Ukraine. This is the slide which talks about the fact that we have a working graphite refinery, high-purity graphite refinery, that's been in operation since 2017, and we've been serving customers in Japan, Korea, and Europe. So to summarize, we have primarily focused on purified graphite for the near-term revenue generation. Does not mean we're divorcing ourselves from the battery anode market. It's just that we're looking at it, we're taking a different approach of penetrating that market. We're probably one of the very few companies, or maybe the only company, which has working refinery in Europe and trying to set up another refinery in North America to essentially cover the entire Western market. I hope this will become clear to you in a minute. We have a very entrepreneurial team. And last but not least, there's a significant value potential creation from our lithium and gold project, which we did not go through today. So I've been very blessed to work with really these gifted individuals. Same way Dominic, Trevor, they all bring decades of experience, primarily in the mining and related worlds. Same way is a proven entrepreneur with his experience from taking Lindian from $1 million to $450 million market cap. Same thing can be said with Dominic, with his experience starting his own company and eventually selling it at a sizable profit. My background is also primarily, as I said at the very beginning, more on the advanced material side, both business creation and then also business management, anywhere from $1 to $1.1 billion large product management. You have EBITDA and cash management responsibilities at these large companies. So with that, I'm going to stop over here. I really want to thank each and every one of you for your time. Look forward to having a wonderful discussion here.
Beautiful. Thanks for that, Prashant. Now, what I might do first is just ask a couple of questions from myself, and then I'll ask a couple of the other questions submitted by attendees. Now, the first one I had was, why focus on purified graphite and not graphite anode?
All right. No, that's a good one. Look, right. So we're not ignoring the lithium-ion battery anode market. So in fact, if you look into even the HPG and UHPG, remember that ultra-high purity graphite 99.9599 can actually go into the lithium-ion batteries without further coating, without further spheronization, but then it becomes a cathode side. It goes on the positive side of the battery as a cathode conductivity booster. So that's one aspect. Secondly, we're not really ignoring the battery anode market. As I said, it's a large market. It's just that in our current, where we are in our journey, in our growth journey, we have to be honest about our capabilities and the capital needs. the battery anode market is very capital intensive. So maybe eventually we'll get there, but today we have to be focused on what we can do with the current focus, with our current capabilities. So the HPG and UHPG make sense because it's capital light. And more importantly, we have a strong USP, defensible value proposition, and we believe it's a near-term opportunity. So it's a high speed to market compared to the battery anode market, where you're looking at, as I said, 3, 4, maybe even 5 years of product qualification.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. Now, I just was hoping you could expand a little bit on what's happening in the US critical mineral sector.
Yeah, no, that's a good one, Luke. See, this this very interesting story here. The critical minerals has all of a sudden become a household word in US, which is very amusing because most people don't really seem to care about lithium and nickel and graphite and everything else, right? But this current administration has realized that you simply cannot be relying um, on one country, especially not so much as such a not a friendly country where it can dictate the terms of the engagement. Um, so there's a significant push from the Trump administration, both from the policy side and also on the financial side. So there's quite a few solicitations out there specifically promoting the critical minerals refining. And at least for the first time, as far as I can remember, the administration is going beyond policy support, beyond financial support. In fact, it is taking equity in critical mineral companies. And this is the public information that US government now has an equity stake in MP materials. It's a tremendous amount of tailwind to have this business here in US and grow dramatically as the market grows.
Yep, yep. There's obviously been a lot go on with you guys in the last couple of years. What are a couple of key takeaways that you've learned from the last 2 years?
Yeah. It's been a humbling experience, look, I'll tell you, I'll be very honest with you. Yeah. Um, Things always take longer than you think they should or they would. That's just the unfortunate reality. But I think going forward, one thing I have learned is we really need to stay focused on what's in our control. For example, how fast can we develop this refinery in US? How fast can we get some agreements done? How fast can we secure financing? Is to some extent, not entirely, but to large extent within our control. What's not within our control is the graphite pricing, the flake graphite pricing, whether it stays 500, goes to 1,000, goes to 1,500. We can all hope, but that's not within our control. So more focus on what's within our control, um, less focus or less worrying about what's not in our control. There's nothing I can do which is not in my control.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, you touched on it then, but just what in regards to Vault Resources' future, where do you specifically see Vault going in the next 3 to 5 years?
Yeah. I think that's a simple one. Look, I'll tell you, in 3 to 5 years, I definitely want Volt to be a profitable, revenue generating, and profitable company. So it doesn't mean we don't have revenues today. As you know, Zavalievsky does have sizable revenues. It's just that they are not consolidated at the Volt level. But at the complete Volt level, I do want at least the US refinery up and running, generating revenue, generating profit, which means we don't want to go for this. We want this dilutive funding, capital raises, placements every 6 months, every 12 months. That's probably one of the tools, but not the only tool in the arsenal that we want to use. So to answer your question, I definitely want Volt to be profitable in 3 to 5 year time frame.
Yeah, yeah, awesome. That's all for me. So I'm going to ask a couple of the questions that have been submitted now. The first one there is how insulated is Volt's supply chain from the geopolitical risk, and has this conflict impacted overall production at all?
The current supply chain risk in Ukraine, is that the question, Luke?
Yeah, correct. Yeah.
Right, right. Yeah, we are not fully insulated. I'll be the first one to admit, but it's not only the supply chain, it's also is the situation on the ground. And one prime example of that would be power. Um, so although our asset is on the western side of the country in Ukraine, and all the action, all the war is on the eastern side, we are not completely insulated. So the power availability is not what we would like. So a lot of times the campaigns, the production campaigns that we execute, really there's a significant planning that goes behind that in order to ensure that we'll have power for 30 days, 45 days, 60 days for the duration of the campaign. So that's one aspect. And secondly, yes, the shipment of the material, whether inside the country or outside of the country, takes much longer than you would think. It's again the supply chain. I would say is probably the right word is weakened.
Yeah, yeah, okay. One more question here was, does Volt anticipate to receive any tax incentives under the US Inflation Reduction Act and the Advanced Manufacturing Production Credit Scheme and possibly additional tax incentives directly from the state of Alabama?
Yeah, that is correct. So if you look into our capital deck for the Alabama Refinery, correct. The tax abatement is typically fairly standard deal for a lot of economic development authorities here. So whether it's state of Alabama, Louisiana, New York, almost all states, they want to offer tax abatement, which will be part of our incentive package. I can anticipate. We are likely to tap into this 45X and 48C. These are the production tax credits offered by the US and the federal government. We are likely to tap into that. But if I look into the total capital deck for the Alabama refinery, I think it's going to be a combination of everything coming from the state government plus federal government and equity and debt combination.
Yep, yep. Now, I just had a question about your strategic partnerships. Obviously, you listed them off before, and I'm speaking specifically of the US partnerships. Now, how do these relationships impact Volt's position in developing the USA graphite refinery?
We are developing relationships and we will continue to do those. So, our belief is this graphite market, no matter what application you're looking at, it's fairly large and its pie is big enough for everyone. So, we continue to create partnerships. In fact, all our customers eventually become our partners. So is there any specific question? So regarding application, regarding market, because that's a broad question. Help me understand that.
Very broad question. Yeah, I think it was more just specifically the partnerships with Alabama Mobility and Power Center, obviously the Critical Minerals Forum, Defense Industrial Base Consortium.
Okay.
The question was specifically, how do these relationships impact Volt's position?
Oh, right. Okay,
Yeah,
no, that's a good one. Right. So AMP, Alabama Mobility and Power Center. So we are one of the probably 2 dozen, 3 dozen different companies there, which also includes Honda and other large automotive OEMs. So there's several advantages. We get to network with these companies. We get to understand what are the opportunities for collaboration. Because as I said, in that supply chain, we do want to partner with companies which are ahead of us in terms of coating capability, sterilization capability, and also companies which want to be supplier of raw material to us. So it's generating competitive intelligence in partnering for the partnering in the supply chain, networking, understanding the funding opportunities. So there are quite a few advantages of these relationships, especially when I look into the Military Power Sources Consortium and DIBC membership, Defense Industrial Base Consortium. They are very adamant, they are very focused on creating this domestic critical mineral supply base. And by having a member of this organization immensely helps us getting an audience, getting a word with the right key decision makers.
yeah. Now I might just round it out with one final question, Prashant, but in your subjective opinion, do you think the current share price represents true valuations?
I definitely don't think so. I think we have a long way to go. I definitely don't think so. I have a long ways to go. And we're going to work together. So along with the board of directors, I'll be working with everyone to ensure that our right price is actually what we believe our inherent price is reflected in the market.
Yeah, okay. I just had one more question that was submitted that I thought was quite pertinent. Now, how confident are you that Volt can obtain the debt funding offtakes needed for both the Alabama and Tanzania project?
Right. So in the Tanzania project, yeah, we had to secure the debt funding, and we also had to secure the bankable offtakes. We have a very good chance, because remember the fund that we're working with brings a significant clout to the market, clout to the table in terms of their own capability and bankable offtakes. We believe once we secure, we already accomplished one task, which is getting a large sizable company to the table. So we have that. Once we secure the bankable offtake from large companies, I believe we'll have a very good chance of securing the debt.
Awesome, mate. Awesome. Well, Prashant, it's been an absolute pleasure. I thank you for coming on and sharing presentation with us and answering the questions there. Hopefully, we can have another one very soon. Sounds like there's a lot going on at Vault Resources. But again, thank you very much. Thank you for everyone that attended, and we'll see you at the next webinar.
Thank you, Luke, and thank you, participants. I really appreciate everyone's time.
Thanks.
Thank you.